Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Form Check Friday. Obviously, you know what it is. You know what we do. We take your videos, we put them up on the screen behind me, and I'm going to give you some technique advice. And yeah, let's just dive on in. So we left off with Andy last time, and Andy had expressed just not really feeling very good about his lifting. He made some comments about having some flexibility issues. He says he wants to power lift, but he feels like he's really weak. So he says he just keeps pulling the weight back and focusing on technique, and then pulling the weight back and focusing on technique. So the first thing I'm going to advise you do is just unfollow Squat University. They're maybe not that helpful if you're following some of these like pages that are telling you, oh, you need to like deload to an empty bar until you have a perfect squat, or you're gonna break yourself. I would consider those barriers to exercise, right? You don't need those. You don't need more barriers. You're already, it sounds like, kind of getting in your head about things. So number one, try to do away with anything that's causing you to be anxious or fearful about your lifting, right? Your technique, even at first glance, your technique is okay to add weight to, right? I think there are very few techniques that are not okay to add weight to. Obviously, the skill of powerlifting is specific to straining at a high level of effort and maintaining technique. So you need both of those things to get good at or to begin powerlifting, right? So number two, do away with all social comparisons. Don't compare yourself, even at your body weight, to somebody else's lifts, to somebody else's physique, to any of that kind of stuff. Honestly, man, like this is gonna sound super cheesy, but like it's your journey. It's not anybody else's, and everybody else is gonna have a different take and a different time trying to go through all of this stuff. It's not about trying to be better than somebody else. If that's your whole motivation for things, it's going to be a really, really tough road. If you can try to be better than yourself and learn to fall in love with the process of going in and lifting the weights, if you can learn to love straining and solving the puzzle of training and programming and figuring things out and experimenting with your body and movement and build awareness with how you're moving, that's where you start to find success. And that is sort of like the heart of where I believe, anyways, most lifters' success comes from. So now that we're past all the sort of philosophical stuff, let's get into the actual technique here. So you look a little bit unsure on the walkout, and also the way that you walk this out tells me that this is very light for you, right? Like this was probably a pretty low effort in terms of being able to push the bar back up. So number one, don't be afraid to add weight to the bar. Even if your technique is not perfect, you can add weight to the bar. I'm gonna say this again. You can get strong and improve technique at the same time. You can quote me on that. All right. So don't be afraid to add a little bit of weight to the bar. Now, when we look at the actual squat itself, I think we have some very common tendencies of the knees kind of going forward first, right? Like we're breaking at the knees. We're trying to stay super upright. The video just crashed. Wonderful timing. Things are going well here, Dylan. So in terms of the squat and the movement itself, I think the first thing you're doing is you're kind of breaking at the knees a little bit, right? It seems like you're very focused on staying upright. Now, being upright doesn't always make a better squat. It is just not the case, right? So you'll see right here, you're trying to like really arch your back, push your chest out, and try to get super upright. Now, a couple things, let's maybe start from the top. Number one, I'd play around with bar position. It looks like we've got a pretty high bar position kind of up on the traps. I would try to get that bar a little bit lower down your back. Again, we're gonna shorten the lever of the torso. We're probably gonna be able to handle a little bit more weight this way, and obviously that's the point. I think you got pretty long legs, so potentially widening your stance a little bit here could be helpful. Might be a little easier to get to depth if we widen the stance a little bit. And like I was saying about pushing the knees forward when you start, don't be afraid to lean, right? Like we want some pressure back here. We want some pressure back on the heels. Don't be afraid if instead of this torso angle, you have this torso angle, right? Don't be afraid to let that chest come down a little bit, right? And we talk about bracing, again, like you can go watch the definitive guide to squat video, and I would definitely recommend doing that for anybody who hasn't. Definitive guide to squatting on our channel. But you can talk about bracing, trying to bring the ribs down a little bit. And the other thing is just practice, man. Just practice. And don't be afraid to add weight, right? I think the biggest things I would change is the bar position and staying a little further back on the heels, and then I would just kind of go from there. The trick with coaching a beginner or being a beginner in this sport is to try not to think of too many things at once. It's really easy to over inundate yourself with cues about feet and about bracing and about hip angle and about bar height and bar position, how to break at the knees or break at the, like it just goes on and on and on. And if you can just try to focus in on one or two things, try to get those things done really well as you're continually repeating this technique and building these habits, that's the best way to start. Try not to get too overwhelmed with this stuff. So let's worry about bar position first. Let's get it a little bit lower, and let's allow yourself to lean a little bit. A little more weight back on the heels, a little more hips back behind you, right? We need to learn the hinge. We need to learn the hinge as opposed to trying to stay super upright and do all the work with the quads. So that would be kind of my starting point. Obviously, there's going to be more that you're going to need to learn along the way, but try not to get intimidated by that fact. And keep it up, man. Just keep going. Keep lifting. You're doing great. Don't get freaked out. Don't listen to people who tell you you're not strong enough, and don't listen to yourself tell you you're not strong enough. All right. Number 2 is Tanner on the bench here. And Tanner asked, number 1, is there anything to fix? And number 2, what's my opinion on wearing a belt for benching? Now, wearing a belt for benching seems to be a very individual choice. I think if it helps you get tight and it doesn't seem to limit your ability to get into position, and by get into position I mean create, the arch that we as powerlifters try to take advantage of to minimize the range of motion. If the belt doesn't interfere with your arch and it helps you get tighter, then by all means bench with the belt. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule on who should and who shouldn't outside of personal preference and comfort. Now, in terms of the bench, there are a few things that I'm seeing going on here. So number 1, I talk about this a fair bit, but I think you can pull the bar out a little bit more out of the rack. That's going to help you get a little bit more depression. Think about when you're at this position, think about doing like a straight arm pull down like you would on a cable stack with a wide grip handle, and just pull the bar down and pull your shoulder blades down. Pull the bar down and pull your shoulder blades down. You can see how my chest comes up when I do that movement. That's what we're after, right? We want that scapular depression. We want those shoulder blades to come down towards your butt. So, second thing, descent actually looks pretty good, but we are kind of collapsing the chest. So as the bar comes down, I want you to think about reaching the chest up to meet it, right? We want to reach the chest actively up to meet it. Again, that's going to help reinforce that upper back positioning. And the final thing we're going to talk about here is that, see how when we touch, the elbows start to flare back like this? What happens when the elbows get back behind the bar is that we're going to push straight up. Now, because we're in kind of this position, I'm exaggerating it with this line just so you can tell. If we push up on this part here, what's going to happen if the weight is here, it's going to fall out towards your belt. What we want is we want the elbow slightly in front of the bar so that when we push up here, right, the pec's going to apply pressure out this way, and the weight is here. Then the bar is going to list or slightly lean back this way, which is going to help give us that sort of ideal bar path of back and up. There's a wonderful Greg Nuckols article. I recommend this all the time. Just look up Greg Nuckols bench bar path. You'll find that very easily. It's a bit of a read, but it's essentially an analysis of bar path on elite bench pressers, and gives a lot of really good reasons for why we have this kind of back and up bar path, why this horizontal movement is kind of important for most people. Now, you can see that we get more of that elbow flare as we go throughout the set, right? You can see we end up actually touching lower here, and the elbow is roughly in the same spot, but we have that same sort of forearm angle. Now watch what happens as you press. You have a hard time getting that bar back. We actually lose a fair bit of shoulder position. So what usually coincides with this like elbow flare is the elevation of the shoulders. So you're coming down, you're relaxing on the chest. That's allowing your elbows to elevate, and it's causing elbows. It's causing your shoulders to elevate, right? I was talking about how we want our scapula or our shoulder blades depressed. What's happening is as you touch, that shoulder blade's creeping up, we're shrugging. And then we're getting into this position instead of being in this position, right? Shoulder blades depressed, elbows tucked a little bit. This is more what we want in the bottom. What we're getting into is this. The elbows are coming back behind the bar, the shoulders are elevating and coming up. That's gonna put us in a way tougher position to press. So we need more control on the chest. We need to stay tighter in the pause, in the contact with the chest. It should not be resting the bar on your chest. It should not be loosening your upper back. If anything, it should be getting tighter into the touch. Hopefully that all makes sense. Our next lifter here is Mark, and before we get into Mark's critique, I just want to let everybody know that if you're looking to get featured on Form Check Friday, you can go ahead and check out the video. There's a link to a video for submission guide in the annotations below. And also, if you're interested in some programming and a wonderful app that you can use to log your training and membership to a community where we do coaching in a sort of larger community space, you can go ahead and sign up for the Calgary Barbell training app. We have about 10 programs on there for all different uses, all different needs: home gym, full gym, etc. Power building, hypertrophy, off-season, peaking, equipped programs. All of that is at calgarybarbell.programs.app. If you're looking for more intensive one-on-one coaching, you can head to calgarybarbell.com. And without any further ado, we're going to get back to this. So, Mark here. He says that he's about 48 years old, or is 48 years old rather. He's 68 kilos. He's spent 5 years lifting, and he said injuries and gym closures and things like that have kind of set him back over the last little while. His previous PR was 187.5. He says currently his top end is about 170, and he's really trying to get to 210. So the biggest thing I'm seeing here with your deadlift, Mark, is that you're letting your upper back go as you pull the bar. So you pull yourself into this like really great position, right? We can see there's that little bit of extension that I'm always talking about here, right? We're packing the lats down, we're getting these shoulder blades depressed. And then what happens as we start the pull? You lose all that position. You allow yourself to roll onto your toes. You lose patience. So the knees come back, the hips come up, and the shoulders come forward. What we need to do is we need to stay pulled into this position. From here, I want you to not compromise any of this position. I want you to be patient and just keep pushing down into the floor. As soon as that bar pulls you forward, as soon as we lose that upper back position, we see the hips shoot up, we see the knees come back, we're losing a lot of leverage advantage. And you'll see that actually seems to get more intensified throughout the set. This second rep, we don't even really pull into that same position, right? So the hips are a fair bit higher, the knees are further back, and that shoulder blade is further forward versus this first rep when we actually pull into a pretty decent position before we start, right? So number one, pull into the same good position every single rep. Number two, don't let yourself get pulled out of position as you initiate the rep. We're just rushing, right? We're pushing, and then when the bar doesn't move right away, it's like, oh, well, we better allow some of this rounding. We better allow some of this hips to shoot up. We better allow some of these other sort of breakdowns to occur so we can get the bar off the floor. And then by the time we get to this last rep, we're starting to suffer at the lockout, and our bar speed is slowing down towards the top end because we've lost this position. Whereas if we can be patient and produce and cultivate and maintain this position here, just go back and look at the position that you're in on this first rep. That's the position you need to be in throughout the set. That's the position you need to maintain throughout each lift. So yeah, those will be my biggest cues there. I think in terms of the pressure you're applying and all that kind of stuff, it looks really good, but we're just losing position as we go through the lift. All right, now Annika's doing some squats here. She says she's been lifting about 6 months. She's looking forward to competing in her first meet relatively soon. And she says that her squat progression is really tough. She says it doesn't seem to be progressing the way she wants it to. She's had some hip flexor issues previously. And she says every time she seems to get up to, about that same intensity, I think around the 200-pound mark, she tends to run into these hip flexor issues repeatedly. So She said she widened her stance a little bit, but it still hurts when she gets to full competition depth, which obviously is essential when we're talking about powerlifting. So Annika, the first thing I'm going to point out here is that generally speaking, we want to be facing into the rack. Now, we do talk a lot about mirrors and how distracting and potentially, you know, detrimental they can be to our performance. However, I think the safety benefits of facing the rack vastly outweigh the potential distraction of having mirrors there. So I would recommend we turn this around. We always want to be re-racking the bar facing the rack so that we can fall forward with it instead of having to try to guess that it's at the right height moving backwards. It's really tough. And on the re-rack, obviously we're more fatigued, we're struggling more perhaps. You know, a big set, you may have a very real issue re-racking backwards. So just a safety thing there. Now in terms of the squat itself, I think we look pretty good overall. Like, I don't think that there's necessarily a big technical component to your pain. There are obviously a ton of different reasons we run into pain. We talked about those on our channel quite a bit, but the sort of biggest reason that we run into pain is doing a little bit too much work. Now, I know you said you're having trouble with your squat progressing, so your instinct might be, okay, I need to do more. This may actually be a case where we need to do a little bit less. I also can't see your feet here. One of the things that I've found can sometimes have some interaction with the lifter's hip flexors will be the toe angle, right? A lot of the times if we're too toed out or we're too straight forward, that can have some interaction. And I would recommend checking out the video that we did with Liz Craven on bracing, because obviously when we go into any kind of like additional anterior pelvic tilt, when we tilt the pelvis like this and have arch in the low back, in some cases, you know, that can end up putting a little bit of extra pressure on the hip flexors, which can cause some discomfort. So I would look at that bracing. I would play around with your feet. And the other thing is, it looks like we have a little bit of inconsistency in depth, rep to rep. Some of these reps were a little bit higher. Some of these reps were a little bit lower. So I mean, like, this is absolutely competition depth, and this is with phone on the floor, right? Phone on the floor, everything's gonna look higher. So you might actually be able to squat a decent little bit higher and maintain more tightness, and then you might not run into these issues with such an extreme range of motion. And it actually looks like if we mark the crease of your hip and the top of your knee there, I think we potentially even get deeper as the set goes on. So that was about the same depth. That was about the same depth. So maybe the consistency is okay. The thing I would point to in that case is that you can probably sacrifice a little bit of depth for tightness. If it's only hurting at the bottom, can we squat a little bit higher and still, you know, hit competition depth? And lastly, this is gonna be probably unrelated to your hip flexor issues, but I would work on this shelf and how we're holding the bar. It looks to me like we're kind of in between high bar and low bar, and it looks like it's very much on top of the shoulder, as opposed to, I think potentially narrowing the grip could help. Just create a bit of a better shelf, because it looks like the bar's maybe out in front of you and causing you to get on your toes on some of these reps. So look at that bar position, see if you can get it maybe a little bit lower, play around with your grip, potentially bring it narrower. And when you're filming these lifts, if you can at all, try to film from about hip height so we can get a better idea of what the judge is going to be seeing when it comes to depth. Obviously, we don't want to be going too deep, especially if you're running into pain issues at depth or below depth. And potentially look at how we're organizing our trunk and bracing, right? If we can get a little bit more of a ribs down brace, a lot of the times that can alleviate tension in the hip flexors. So that would be a list of suggestions there, and I hope one, some, or any of those help you. All right, up next we have Jackson doing some bench. He says he benches shoulder width and that going wider irritates his shoulders. So this is super narrow, dude. Yeah, super close grip bench. The thing that I would do, and I'm gonna kind of come back at you a little bit with the I know the reason you put that in there is so I don't go, hey bro, have you tried widening your grip? But you know what, gall dang it, I'm gonna do it anyways. So one of the biggest reasons people run into issues when they make large scale changes to their technique, and then they start running into pain issues, is not inherently because of the new positions, but because the new positions are not something they've trained, right? So it's not that going wider is harder on your shoulders per se. You may, try a bunch of different experiments and find that that's the case anyways, and that's fine. That does happen. But if you go to a wide grip bench press and you use the same loads and the same volume and expect the same max or the same training max, working max, whatever, and then you run into issues, it's likely more because you're not adapted to a wide stance than it is that wide grip, than it is that a wide grip is inherently worse or harder on your shoulders or whatever. So what I would recommend is slowly widening your grip just a little bit at a time, or go all the way out to like a wide grip and use that as an accessory movement with a different max, probably lower than what you're doing with this. So that, I mean, there are going to be ways around that where you can work in some wider grip bench pressing to see if it helps you, as opposed to just saying, nope, not for me, not going to do it. So that's all I'm going to say. If you run some experiments like that and you work your way up slowly, and it just like, there's no way around having it bother your shoulders, that does happen. Like I said, it's potential, but yeah, I would think that we can bench a little bit wider than this. In terms of the bench itself, he says his best bench is 350 at 210. He feels a little bit unstable lowering the last few inches. That's because your shoulders have to go through a heck of a lot of range of motion to touch your chest, right? So even if you go like 2 fingers wider, you're gonna basically cut that little bit of instability or that little bit of the unstable part of the range of motion out of the bench. So not necessarily a case to start like gripping out here, but dude, if we go from like here to here, your elbow is going to be here instead of here when we touch. And that in and of itself might just remove the problematic part of the range of motion, right? It might just be that you are having like a hard time getting all the way to here with maintaining shoulder depression, maintaining chest up, maintaining, all of the things that we try to go for in the bench press. Excuse me. So, I mean, as much as I think you sent this in being like, don't tell me to go wider, bro, that might be one of the solutions, because that's going to tighten up the touch. It's going to require less range of motion from the shoulders. Like, we're actually benching like inside of where the elbows want to go right now. It's very narrow. So let's play the hypothetical where you absolutely under no circumstances can go any wider, even a few millimeters or like half an inch. It's not going to happen. The biggest thing I would do is just practice long pauses. Practice some spoto presses where you're pausing like a quarter of an inch off the chest and just hammer that bottom range of motion. It looks like you might be able to, no, maybe not on this rack. I was going to say do some pin presses. But just do everything you can to hammer that bottom of the range of motion. Tempo bench, long pause bench, spoto presses very close to the chest, like light touch, t-shirt touch style touch and go. All those kinds of things where you're forced to really hone in and focus on that bottom of the range of motion. All those things are going to be helpful when the bottom is, seemingly problematic. So yeah, hopefully that helps, man. All right, and now we have Lavon. So Lavon's been deadlifting about 2 months. Started with conventional because he found it more, started with conventional but switched to sumo because, get this, he found it more enjoyable and it looks cool. And yes, Lavon, pulling sumo does look cool. Okay? Internet? Anyways. So he wants to get his technique dialed in. He says he's a little worried that he's adding weight too slowly. Being maybe a little bit too focused on technique. So I'm gonna leave this one here for our wonderful, wonderful audience and community. I saw all y'all's comments on Andy's squat, and thank you for being good people and leaving good advice and helping to lift each other up in the community, because that's absolutely what this is all about. So anyways, I just wanted to give anybody watching who's planning to comment below a quick shout out for being awesome. I love that our community is like that. So anyways, gonna leave this one up here. Go ahead and head to the comment section below. Let us know what you think Lavon could do a little bit better to tighten up his technique, and I will weigh in on it next week, where we'll see everybody on Friday for Form Check Friday. Take it easy, everybody.